A Jedi Order at the height of its reach, a republic eager to shine the light of democracy across the galaxy, and a tempestuous group of rabble-rousers looking to burn the whole thing down for fun. This is the High Republic. Welcome to Explainiac. I'm Dan Casey, and today we're going to be going back to an even longer time ago in the same galaxy far, far away to visit the major events and characters of Star Wars: The High Republic. It's an ambitious multimedia series that will finally see its live-action on-screen debut with this summer's Disney Plus series, The Acolyte. The real-world origins of the High Republic began in 2018 under the codename Avengers Initiative. Sorry, I meant the All-Star Initiative, not to be confused with the ending of Shrek. And later, it was also called Project Luminous, which you also shouldn't confuse with Shrek for obvious reasons. It's totally different. The initial project included 5 authors: Justina Ireland, Cavan Scott, Claudia Gray, Daniel Jose Older, and Charles Soule. Each had been established as a fan-favorite author both within the Star Wars canon and their respective outside works. They would later add even more authors to the mix like George Mann, Alyssa Wong, Zoraida Cordova, and Tessa Gratton. The initial core group spent days at Skywalker Ranch in 2018 and again in 2019 working with Lucasfilm to craft stories for a new era of Star Wars storytelling, one that would eventually come to be known as the High Republic. Now, the High Republic is older than the New Republic, but newer than the Old Republic, and it's also at a much higher altitude, hence the High Republic. Now, one of those things is a lie, which I'll give you one guess as to what it was. Liar! The launch of the High Republic books was delayed to early 2021 due to publishing supply issues in the wake of the COVID shutdowns. But the era gained a boost of on-screen prominence in December 2020, when it was announced that the Acolyte television series would be set in the waning days of the High Republic. Now, for many people out there, the Acolyte may be your first introduction to the world of the High Republic. So today we're going to give you a broad overview of the main timeline of the High Republic, focusing mainly on broad strokes of the overall history rather than diving into individual scenes and chapters, because if we did that, we'd just be reading a book to you, and nobody wants me to do that because, look, I have a son, he'll vouch, he does not like the voices I choose for the Gruffalo. He pushes it away. Starting around 500 years before the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, or 500 years BBY before the Battle of Yavin, if you nasty, the High Republic era is one of exploration and expansion. The Galactic Republic is largely recovered from the Dark Ages following the fall of the Old Republic. The Republic's presence is largely concentrated on the core worlds. Seeing themselves as a beacon of hope and stability in the galaxy, though, a push is underway to expand the Republic to the worlds on the Outer Rim, especially a section of the Outer Rim worlds known as the Galactic Frontier. I mean, the Outer Rim, what's not to like? We got rich slugmen in a pit you can push anyone named Boba Fett into and they'll be totally fine, except for having those weird goo dreams in his weird water pod. The Frontier's popular among pirates, including familiar faces like Maz Kanata and even Dexter Jetster, who evidently hasn't quite figured out his pancake recipes yet. Despite the utter lack of Flap and Jack, this is a golden age for the Jedi. Believing the Sith threat was fully defeated generations earlier, the Jedi focus fully on their mission of, as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say, being the guardians of peace and justice, which I'm sure will continue on just fine with no problems whatsoever. For light and life is a common rallying cry for this era's Jedi, as they work independently but also side by side with the Republic as part of their ongoing mission. These Jedi are frequently adorned in their temple robes with a resplendent gold on white color scheme, but the more familiar brown robes can still be seen on Jedi serving out in the field. Early in this era, the Republic and the Jedi partner on an exploration project made up of Pathfinder teams, usually a Jedi Master and a Padawan, alongside a Republic pilot and medic and a pair of droids, because they only come in twos. These Pathfinder teams would seek out safe and stable hyperspace routes to try and establish contact with previously isolated worlds and try to bring them access to the Republic, and the Republic access to them. It's definitely not colonialism, right? Let's call it mercantilism and call it a day. Now, in addition to the Pathfinder teams, private citizens also got in on this hyperspace exploration racket, setting off the Great Hyperspace Rush, with fortune seekers trying to map out and lay claim to previously undiscovered hyperspace lanes. 2 rival families emerged as the major hyperspace prospectors of the time: the Grafs and the San Tekkas, ancestors of Lor San Tekka, the character that Max von Sydow played in The Force Awakens. Remember that guy? In all of his scene? The secret sauce in the San Tekka's success, though, is Mari San Tekka. Mari is force sensitive, and her abilities let her detect the location of unexpected and unusual hyperspace routes known as paths. The San Tekkas kept Mari's abilities hidden and used them to amass great profits until one day she was kidnapped and then disappeared. Now let's veer off the hyperspace lane for just a moment and zoom out a bit. Story-wise, the High Republic is currently divided into 3 main phases, but we're going to discuss them in chronological order rather than publishing order. So with that said, we're going to start with Phase 2. That takes place in 382 BBY, 150 years before the rest of the series. During the events of the YA novel Path of Deceit, a fanatical cult called the Path of the Open Hand gains prominence on a world called Dalna. The Path of the Open Hand believes that the Jedi and any other Force sensitives who use their powers are actively harming the Force. It's essentially a religious belief based around the butterfly effect. They also have a catchphrase, "The Force shall be free," because any good cult should have a motto. A woman named Alicia Zeveron manipulates the cult and becomes their prophet for her own personal gain, which I've never heard of that happening in a cult before. Known to the Open Hand members as the Mother, Alicia is secretly a Force user herself, with abilities that give her intense riz, making it easier for followers to fall under her sway. One such follower is Marta Rowe, a member of a refugee alien race known as the Evereni. They are largely distrusted by the galaxy. The Evereni homeworld was destroyed first by a great storm, then by a corrupt government, and that left the survivors distrustful of everyone but themselves, which makes them frequently not someone people want to be around. Marta is a true believer in the Path of the Open Hand, but her faith is tested when she falls in love with a Jedi Padawan named Kevmo Zink. I can't get enough of this name. It's so gloriously Star Wars stupid. I love it so much. Up there with Therm Scissor Punch. Kevmo and his master arrive on the Open Hand's homeworld of Dalna because they suspect the cult's involvement with a series of thefts involving powerful Force artifacts from various Jedi archives. They suspect this because it's absolutely true. The Mother's been sending a group of followers called the Children out to collect these artifacts under the guise of preventing the Jedi from using them to abuse the Force. Now, the Mother hates the Jedi because of a deep-seated feeling of jealousy. They recruited her sister to join their order and not her. So you see, it's actually better when the Jedi take all children from their families and not just one, because, I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen to a kid at the Jedi Temple? A hyperspace prospector named, you guessed it, Sunshine Dobbs brings the Mother a creature from a recently discovered Force-enriched world known as Planet X, a name you definitely thought I was going to say, right? This creature feeds off Force users, causing them to have intense, terrifying hallucinations before devouring their entire essence, leaving a lifeless husk behind. It's basically Salvia the creature. The Mother calls these creatures the Leveler, but the Jedi and later books ironically called them the Nameless, so we'll use that term moving forward. The Jedi artifacts that the Mother's been sending her children to steal are a set of rods that when combined turn into the Rod of Power that let someone dominate and control the Nameless. The first victims of the Nameless are unfortunately Kevmo Zink and his master. Marta, in her fanaticism, interprets Kevmo's death as an example of the destruction that follows from using the Force, and that causes her to become even more devoted to the Open Hand's cause. Meanwhile, depicted in the novel Convergence, a pair of worlds have been engaged in on-again, off-again wars spanning back through the ages. Iram and Arono, sort of like the France and England of space. They're roughly 5 years into their most recent conflict, but talk of a ceasefire has begun. The Mother has used the fear of war and the displacement of refugees to build the ranks of the Path of the Open Hand. Fearing that a peace treaty would harm her ability to amass even more power, she attempts to subvert that process. Through Jedi intervention, the two worlds agree to meet on Jedha to sign a peace treaty. Now, you may remember Jedha as the world where Jyn Erso finds Saw Gerrera in Rogue One.
Are we not still friends?
What was that voice he was doing? Anyway, known as the Pilgrim's Moon, Jedha's considered a holy city by many of the various Force sects active during the High Republic. Yes, the Jedi, but also groups like the Church of the Force and the Guardians of the Wills. That is the warrior monk order that Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus belonged to in Rogue One. These different faiths peacefully coexisted and operated via a conclave of representatives from each one. Members of the Path of the Open Hand arrive on Jedha under the guise of trying to join the conclave. When their extreme demands are not met, the Path's herald incites a riot among the citizens of the city. The Path also releases one of the Levelers, causing nearby Jedi to suffer immense hallucinations and lash out violently. The violence in the streets leads to the collapse of the peace treaty, and the forces of Irem and Arono begin to attack each other once more. This armed conflict becomes known as the Battle of Jeddah and is a subject of a scripted audio drama of the same name. But wait, there's more, because the events of the battle and the riot also play out across both the High Republic and the High Republic Adventures comic book volumes of the Phase 2 era. Now, the destructive aftermath of this battle can still be seen centuries later in Rogue One, as the colossal Jedi statue known as the Final Protector still lies in the sand after falling during this firefight. And if you're wondering why it can't be seen after Rogue One, well, watch Rogue One! The Jedi get both armies to stand down and bring the Battle of Jeddah to an end, but the path of the Open Hand's role in this riot and battle draws major suspicion. The events of the novels Cataclysm and Path of Vengeance overlap each other and cover this exact event. Marda Rowe accompanies other Path members to Planet X to collect more of the Nameless, but starts to distrust the Mother's motives. I mean, geez, could this lady be up to no good when she turned Kev Mo into Kev Less? Upon discovering that the Mother has been a Force user all along, Marda seizes power over the cult and renames it the Path of the Closed Fist, declaring themselves enemies of the Jedi and their abuse of the Force. At the same time as Marda's coup, teams of Jedi arrive on Dalna and investigate the Path, along with forces from Irem and Arono. This militant new form of the cult, alongside their new litter of Nameless, caused events to escalate rapidly into a massacre that became known as the Night of Sorrow. The Mother dies in the conflict, and Marda Rowe escapes on the cult starship, the Gaze Electric. I love when they played the Muppet Show. In the aftermath of the Night of Sorrow, the path of the Open Hand is fractured and dissolved. The Irem and Arono War shifts into a Cold War that will last for another generation before a Jedi rescue of their mutual royal families leads to a permanent and lasting treaty. Marda Rowe, on the other hand, swears revenge against the Jedi and abandons her previous religious path, becoming the leader of a gang of marauders called the Nihil. A Jedi named Aslan Rel, driven mad by his multiple encounters with the Nameless during the battle, afterward begins to keep a journal of all the information he can find out about them. Rel's singular obsession with these creatures eventually leads to his fall to the dark side and him leaving the Jedi Order. Afraid that public knowledge of the Nameless could be used against the Jedi, Grandmaster Yoda and other Jedi keep information about them out of the archives. Over the next few decades, the Nameless become something of a Jedi folklore. It's literally not a story the Jedi would tell you because they deleted it from the archives. Anyway, and with that, we come to the end of Phase 2. Phase 1 begins 150 years later in 232 BBY in the novel Light of the Jedi. This was the very first book produced under the High Republic banner, so this book is basically A New Hope compared to Phase 2's prequel era, and it begins with a literal bang. A cargo ship known as the Legacy Run is traveling through hyperspace when a strange shadowy object appears in front of it, causing a collision. The impact of the crash sends huge chunks of Starship careening through hyperspace, causing even more crashes and destruction along many high-traffic routes. It forces ships in the region to drop out of hyperspace lanes and become stranded in the process. This event became known as the Great Hyperspace Disaster. Large pieces of the Legacy Run began dropping out of light speed and zooming out of control towards the planet in the Hetzel system. It's home to over 40 billion people and has unusually ample farming abilities that make it a breadbasket for an entire region of the Outer Rim. As pieces of the Legacy Run emerge from hyperspace, a massive rescue effort is undertaken by the Jedi to try and stop them from colliding with the various planets in this system. A Jedi Master named Avar Kriss uses her impressive Force abilities to guide all the Jedi in the system to work as a collective unit, and save the billions of threatened lives in the process. In the aftermath of the Great Hyperspace Disaster, Avar Kriss becomes known as the Hero of Hetzel, and the Jedi's efforts to save the system become a symbol of the hope the Jedi bring to the galaxy far, far away. Or, since it's the title of the book, the light and the lightsabers of the Jedi. Avar is named Grand Marshal of the Starlight Beacon, a recently constructed Jedi space station that will serve as the Jedi's base of operations on the galactic frontier. It's kind of like the Justice League's headquarters, but with the Mon Calamartian Manhunter instead. I said! We meet the Nihil properly in Light of the Jedi, and they've evolved or devolved into this vicious gang of Viking-like raiders. They have a hierarchy based on storm terminology, and they often refer to their membership as riding the storm. These raiders are best known for dropping gas bombs to disorient their victims, and they wear helmets with breathing masks to filter the toxins out for themselves. The Nihil are divided into 3 large groups called Tempests, almost like individual families in the Mafia or regional chapters of a motorcycle gang. Each Tempest is led by a Tempest Runner, and beneath them there are even more divided groups and gangs led by Storms, who divide further into Clouds and Strikes. You will never find a more wretched pyramid scheme of scum and villainy in all the galaxy far, far away. The three Tempest Runners hold an uneasy alliance at the top of the hierarchy alongside Marchion Ro, a descendant of Marda who uses the title the Eye, like his father before him, or also like the Eye of the Storm. Because if there's one thing Star Wars loves, it's a Nepo baby with an air-based name. Now, the Ro families maintained their position in the Nihil leadership not by commanding a Tempest, but by providing them all with access to the paths, those same unique hyperspace routes that young Mari Santeca could predict before she went missing. That's because the Ro family are the ones who kidnapped her and kept her in a stasis chamber for decades, using her to detect the paths. The Nihil then used these paths to appear seemingly out of thin air when carrying out their raids. Now, moving on, we're also introduced to Lina So, the current Chancellor of the Republic. She's undertaken a great works project which includes the Starlight Beacon, to uphold the Republic as the shining light of the galaxy, as she sees it. Lina So coins the phrase, "We are all the Republic," as this jingoistic unifying motto, and it gets to be a tad bit unsettling the more times you read it being mindlessly repeated. Under Lina's guidance, the Republic tries to mathematically determine where more emergences of the Legacy Run's hull will occur, to protect the Republic's worlds and get hyperspace lanes back up and running. Marchion Ro utilizes Mari Santeca's abilities to predict where these emergencies will occur, and the Nihil use that knowledge to threaten and extort worlds, offering to stop collisions in exchange for a hefty fee. Ah, you can fit a lot of bread in this basket, huh? Be a shame if something happened to it, like a frickin' ship, turning this into toast. As the Jedi and the Republic start to retaliate to the Nihil's actions, Marchion Ro directs one of the Tempest Runners, Kassav Milico, to conduct a raid on the planet Eriadu, the future homeworld of Grand Moff Tarkin, who you may remember from blowing up all of frickin' Alderaan.
I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
A battle then breaks out between the Nihil Tempest and the Jedi and Republic forces. This is the first battle the Jedi have engaged in directly in generations. Unfortunately for Kassav, he discovers that his Tempest path drives have been sabotaged. The raid was unknowingly a suicide mission orchestrated by Marchion Ro. Ro uses the battle to remove Kassav, a rival to his power, and to convince the Republic they had eliminated the entire Nihil forces. During the battle, a Jedi named Loden Greatstorm is captured by the Nihil and taken back to Ro, who keeps him in a special cell. Loden is tortured and used as a test subject for Ro to learn the full extent of the Nameless's abilities. Ro is in possession of the Rod of Seasons, half of the Rod of Power, and uses that to maintain limited control over these creatures. Marchion Ro emerges as the primary antagonist of Phases 1 and 3. It's revealed that Ro orchestrated the Great Hyperspace Disaster by using one of the Nihil path engines to caused the crash. While the Jedi and the Republic believe the Nihil threat to be eliminated, it's only step one in his plan. Ro's family's been plotting revenge against the Jedi ever since Marda Ro fled on the Night of Sorrow. For the majority of Phase 1, Marchion Ro is a highly visible character for the audience to follow, but to the Republic, he remains an unknown figure pulling strings behind the scenes, a real phantom menace. His own rise to power and the history of the Evereni's original escape from their homeworld is chronicled in Charles Soule's Eye of the Storm comic series. While ships are stranded out of hyperspace during the disaster, a displaced group of ships including Jedi, Nihil, and other various Republic criminal organizations take refuge at an ancient abandoned space station built by a race known as the Amaxine. Jedi on board the station inadvertently released the Drengir, an ancient species of sentient, carnivorous, and very dark side adjacent plants that had been sealed in the station centuries earlier by the Sith. These Drengir serve as a secondary antagonist during Phase 1 and much of Cavan Scott's initial run of Star Wars The High Republic comics, which focus on Avar Kriss and the Jedi of the Starlight Beacon, as they fight the Drengir across various worlds. Kriss makes the controversial decision to ally with the Hutt crime family against this threat. It's an alliance that holds until Kriss refuses to kill the progenitor of the Drengir, placing it instead in stasis. Much of the rest of the early Phase 1 books and comics revolve around Jedi facing off against what they believe to be the remnants of the Nihil. In the middle grade novel, A Test of Courage, we're introduced to Vernestra Ro, a Moralian like Luminara Unduli and Tales of the Empire's Barriss Offee. At 15, Ro's one of the youngest Jedi to be promoted from Padawan to Knight. Vernestra has a custom-built lightsaber that can be turned into a light whip, similar to the ones used by the Night Sisters of Dathomir. It's a function that came to her in a Force vision while she slept. And Vernestra is one of the High Republic characters that have been confirmed to appear in the Acolyte, though at a much older age. A year after the Great Hyperspace Disaster, the Republic grows complacent. Believing the Nihil defeated, Chancellor Sung moved forward with their plans to hold the Republic Fair. It's kinda like the World's Fair, but in Star Wars, and the planet Valo, and with 100% fewer spooky clocks. The fair has pavilions from worlds all across the Republic on floating platforms, and even hosts an It's a Small World dark ride attraction. To the surprise of literally no one, somehow the Nihil return and launch a massive coordinated assault. Who could have seen this coming? The events of the Republic Fair make up the entire second half of the novel The Rising Storm and the middle grade novel Race to Crash Point Tower. One of the primary protagonists of Storm is Elzar Mann, a Jedi Master who has very not the Jedi way feelings about Avar Kriss. Elzar helps the Republic and Jedi rally against the Nihil ships during this conflict, and even gets to ride basically a space dragon. In the heat of battle, a frustrated Elzar Mann lets himself tap into the dark side momentarily, meaning he needs some major spa-like downtime following the conflict to restore his balance with the Force. Or maybe just a nice glass of green milk like a certain Luke I could name. After the attack on the fair, the Republic and the Jedi go on the offensive against the Nihil, with Operation Counter-Strike, which sounds like most of my free time in high school. So much time on DE Dust. Now, most of the rest of Phase 1 deals with the Jedi confronting the Nihil directly. While pursuing the Nihil after the fair, the Jedi assault their base and witness the death of the captured Loden Greatstorm when he's attacked by one of the Nameless. And speaking of Jedi left to cruel and unusual fates, it's unclear exactly when during the Nihil era of the High Republic these events occur, but at one point a Jedi Knight named Dagan Gera discovers a paradise planet called Tanalorr. He becomes obsessed with it. The Jedi Order's subsequent decision to abandon this world during a Nihil invasion causes Gera to ultimately fall to the dark side. After sustaining injuries in a lightsaber battle with his former friend Santari Khri, Gera is placed in stasis in a Bacta tank. Forgotten for centuries, Gera is later awakened by the Jedi Cal Kestis during the Age of the Empire, and he serves as the primary antagonist of the Jedi Survivor video game. Since the Jedi still don't fully know the hierarchy of the Nihil, they once again make a huge mistake. They believe the single Tempest Runner, a Twi'lek woman named Lorna Dee, is the person who's leading this whole organization. Avar Kriss and her Starlight Beacon Jedi defy the Council and send Jedi undercover into Nihil territory on the hunt for Lorna Dee. Avar Kriss has her own close call with the dark side as she nearly murders Lorna Dee in anger, but she's stopped by Jedi Knight Keeve Trennis, the main character of the Phase 1 High Republic comics. And if you want to delve Lorna deeper, her backstory about her capture and eventual escape from the Republic are all chronicled in the scripted audio drama Tempest Runner. Now, of particular note here is that in the Clone Wars era audiobook Dooku Jedi Lost, Count Dooku is considered to be one of the Lost 20. These were Jedi who left the Order throughout its history, and one of the previous Lost Jedi named in that book was also called Trennis. It's unclear currently if that means Keeve Trennis, but it's worth noting that both Dooku Jedi Lost and the High Republic comics do share an author, Cavan Scott. So is Keeve Trennis going to leave the Jedi? Will that happen in the Acolyte show? Cavan Scott has dodged the question so far, so only time will tell if we see Keeve leave and become Trennis the Menace. Ooh, Misa nailed it. Now I know what you're thinking. There's no way the Jedi and the Republic would mistakenly think they decimated the Nihil again, right? Well, they did. Marchion Ro springs the next phase of his plan. He sends subordinates to Corellia to try and steal a fleet of ships, and simultaneously launches a series of assaults on a number of different worlds, creating a refugee crisis. As Starlight Beacon arrives over Irem, one of those once warring worlds, to aid in the wake of a natural disaster, the station begins receiving wave after wave of survivors from the Nihil attacks. A Nihil sabotage team takes advantage of the confusion and how overwhelmed the beacon is and slips through. They move quickly throughout the station, causing systemic and structural failures. In doing so, they also unleash a Nameless onto the station to cause havoc among the Jedi on board. While the Jedi thwart the Nihil's plans to steal the Corellian fleet, the sabotage of Starlight Beacon is discovered far too late. Explosions from the Nihil team ultimately cause the station to be ripped in twain. Asunder even! And this served as a clever storytelling device as well, by letting two different writers tell different stories of Starlight's destruction. Cavan Scott told the story of Avar Kriss and her team in the comics, while Claudia Gray's novel The Fallen Star focuses on Elzar Mann and the Jedi in the other half. A fatal mistake by Elzar stops the one chance the Jedi had to save the station, and it crashes down to the planet below. Jedi Council member Stellan Gios, who's Vernestra's former master and a close friend of both Elzar and Avar, dies while trying to ensure the falling Starlight Beacon will impact a body of water instead of a major city on Irem's surface. As the Republic watches in abject horror while their symbol of the Jedi's light is ripped from the sky, Marchion Ro finally reveals himself to the galaxy at large. As the Jedi and Republic realize they've been played this entire time, Phase 1 comes to a sudden and dramatic end. Phase 3 picks up a year after the fall of Starlight Beacon in 229 BBY. The first book in this era is called The Eye of Darkness. In the time since the Nihil's victory, they've revealed yet another piece of technology at their disposal, a massive barrier in space called the Storm Wall. This series of disruptive buoys pulls ships out of hyperspace and prevents lightspeed travel beyond them. The Nihil have declared a region of the galactic frontier to be the Nihil Occlusion Zone, and they prevent the Jedi and the Republic from traveling beyond this point. Now, Phase 3 is still actively being published, so we don't fully know how the events will play out or how they're going to feed into the story of the Acolyte, which is close to a century later. Most of the Eye of Darkness and the YA novel deal with Jedi on both sides of the Storm Wall trying to bring it down or escape from beyond it to bring reports back to Coruscant and the galaxy at large. And Grandmaster Yoda, this again, missing for much of Phase 1, has returned to the Council after seeking out Aslan Rel, who is still alive and may serve as the key to defeating the Nameless. The next YA novel, Tears of the Nameless, is due out in September 2024 and will likely follow that thread even further. Inside the Storm Wall, Marchion Ro has established a somewhat feudal system of occupation under the Nihil, because resistance is feudal in this instance. He has intentionally placed his new base of operations on Hetzel to subvert what was once seen as the hopeful image of the Jedi in the galaxy far, far away. He has reorganized the Tempest Runner structure as well into a series of toady ministers, including Gira Staros, a former Republic senator who colluded with the Nihil and now serves as a propagandist minister of information. Staros wants to broker a deal with the Republic to legitimize Nihil rule over the Occlusion Zone, and has come into conflict with Marchion, whose ancestral desire for vengeance often leads him to want to burn it all down. Gira Staros also seems to be an ancestor of Sana Staros, a former associate of Han Solo, and sometimes romantic partner of Dr. Aphra in the Star Wars comics. In the Dr. Aphra comics, this pair attempts to steal the remnants of a Nihil Path Engine, which was the first appearance of the Path Engines in any Star Wars media, thereby foreshadowing the High Republic. In Eye of Darkness, Elzar Mann has taken over Stellan Gios' seat on the Jedi Council, but he struggles with living in the shadow of his late friend. Meanwhile, Avar Kriss has been trapped on the other side of the Storm Wall and feels that she too has lost her way in the Force. By the end of the book, she is ultimately able to escape after a battle on a hijacked Nihil vessel and returns to Coruscant. The romantic tension between her and Elzar Mann is still very much simmering and threatens to boil over in the next novel, Temptation of the Force, due out on June 11th, a week after the premiere of The Acolyte, and things could get hotter than Anakin Skywalker on Mustafar. I hope that's a good thing. Anyway, folks, there you have it. That's everything you need to know about the High Republic before you watch The Acolyte. If we left anything else out, then please know, yes, that was a personal attack. Now, we'll have plenty of other deep dives for you in the days ahead into The Acolyte, as well as the rest of the galaxy far, far away over on Nerdist. A major thank you again to Riley Silverman for her help in putting this video together, and thank you so much for watching.
Oh yes, thank you.
Now, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it and share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new episode. If you want even more deep dives into pop culture, you can watch previous episodes of Explainiac right now wherever fine Nerdist content is served. And remember, not everything in life can be explained, but for everything else, there's this show.